This video is part of a series on how storytelling works. How did humans invent fantasy worlds? Well, if you ask me, it started around campfires, with stories of gods and monsters, epic battles, and magical feats. But then as soon as writing was invented, those campfire tales were recorded on clay tablets and papyrus. And when you look at some of the earliest stories ever written down, you see the same themes that capture our imaginations today. So let's explore how ancient storytellers set the stage for all the fantasy worlds that came after. And to understand how fantasy got started, it helps to know how the word fantasy gets defined. Basically, any story that transports us to a realm of imagination can be considered fantasy. This means stories where people possess supernatural powers, where magic is real, where there are fantastical creatures or worlds unlike our own. We enter a realm where anything goes, where the impossible becomes possible. And this definition takes us back to some of the first stories ever told, ancient myths. Let's start with one of the earliest surviving examples of an epic poem, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a tale of heroism, friendship, and loss that originated in Mesopotamia about 4,000 years ago. It tells the story of Gilgamesh, a mighty warrior king who embarks on adventures to confront gods, monsters, and his own mortality. For instance, he confronts Humbaba, the terrifying monster guarding the cedar forest, slaying him with the help of his friend Enkidu. He even ventures into the underworld to rescue his friend from death. Now, these tasks, especially those involving the supernatural or the dead, resonate with classic fantasy themes. They establish motifs like quests to dangerous realms, encounters with terrifying creatures, and the restoration of balance between the human and divine worlds, which remain prevalent in modern fantasy today. Another example is the Enuma Elish, also known as the Babylonian Epic of Creation. This poem details the Mesopotamian creation story and explains the origins of the world and its inhabitants. It starts with the primordial state of the universe, a time when the world is formless and chaotic, ruled by the goddess Tiamat, the mother of all living things. She is later challenged by the god Marduk, who defeats her, creates the earth and the heavens, and establishes a cosmic order. That's pretty metal. This epic introduces themes central to fantasy, a battle between good and evil, the triumph of order over chaos, and a world structured by divine will. It gives us a foundational image of the cosmos as a battlefield for gods and monsters, a theme that runs through many fantasies. But it's important to remember that for ancient audiences, these weren't exactly works of fiction. They believed these tales were true accounts of the past or revelations from gods, reflecting their understanding of the world and their place within it. Now, moving away from Mesopotamian myths, let's travel to ancient Egypt. There's a text called the Westcar Papyrus that contains several magical and satirical tales. One story involves a man who visits an enchanted land where kings are transformed into women and men turn into ibises. It shows a world where reality is fluid and unpredictable, defying logic and reason. Another story features a magician outsmarting his queen with clever wordplay. It highlights the power of language and intellect over brute force or magical power. These stories demonstrate how early Egyptian literature blended history, satire, and fantastical elements, blurring the lines between the real and imaginary. So why do these ancient stories feel like fantasy? Well, they establish a world where the boundaries between reality seem much more flexible than ours. For instance, the idea of divine and supernatural. Throughout these stories, we see gods interacting with humans, sometimes wreaking havoc, sometimes guiding heroes on their quests. For example, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Gilgamesh himself is 2/3 god and 1/3 human. His divine nature grants him superhuman strength and endurance, and he receives guidance and support from various gods throughout his journey. Or take the Egyptian creation myth, where gods create the world and its inhabitants according to their will. The concept of magic is also present. The magician in the Westcar Papyrus uses spells to transform kings and queens, while Gilgamesh relies on divine magic to accomplish his tasks. Then there's the epic scope and scale. These stories are filled with grand battles and sweeping narratives that cover not just individual lives, but the fate of entire civilizations. And the hero's journey, whether it's Gilgamesh searching for immortality or the magician navigating courtly intrigue, these characters embark on journeys that push them to their limits, testing their courage, intelligence, and resilience. And importantly, many of these journeys take place in realms beyond our own. Gilgamesh travels to the underworld, confronting the goddess Ereshkigal and facing monstrous guardians to save his friend Enkidu. In the Babylonian creation myth, we have cosmic battles taking place between gods on a scale that dwarfs anything imaginable in the human world. Finally, there's a sense of moral and philosophical inquiry. Some stories carry strong messages about virtue, hubris, or the consequences of challenging divine authority, and in others there's a blending of reality with dreams or a kind of magical realism that leaves room for interpretation. For example, the frame story of the Westcott Papyrus itself feels like a dreamlike interlude from the real world. So when we look at these ancient tales, we find seeds of what would develop into full-fledged fantasy worlds. And these ancient examples aren't isolated cases. Similar myths and legends with fantastic elements are found across many cultures, from Greek and Roman mythology to Native American storytelling, from African folk tales to those from Asia. They share common threads that tap into universal human experiences and the limitless potential of our imaginations. Let's dive into another notable mythology, Greek and Roman myths. This tradition is brimming with fantastical tales of gods, heroes, and monsters, and it's an excellent showcase of how ancient storytelling established elements that we now associate with fantasy. Take, for instance, Aristophanes' play The Birds. It's a comedy that follows a man named Eumelmus who, frustrated by the expensive sacrifices to the gods, decides to build his own city in the sky where sacrifices cost nothing. With the help of his fellow citizens, they construct a tower that reaches the heavens, and the play imagines a world where mortals can literally fly away from their problems. It's a lighter-hearted example, but it showcases the idea of escaping to a new world or a different plane of existence. This theme is later echoed in fantasy novels like the Chronicles of Narnia. Then there's the capacity for transformations. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, we see humans turning into animals, plants, or even inanimate objects. Characters like Daphne, who transforms into a laurel tree to escape Apollo, or King Midas, who becomes covered in donkey ears after his encounter with the god Pan. Similarly, in Apuleius' novel, The Golden Ass, the protagonist undergoes a series of bizarre and unsettling shapeshifts, highlighting the absurdity and confusion of life. These tales prefigure modern fantasy's frequent use of transformations as a plot device or a way to comment on the human condition. Moving to a more philosophical vein, we have allegories like those found in Plato's Republic. These stories use symbolism and metaphor to convey deeper meanings about society, politics, or the human psyche. For example, Plato's allegory of the cave explores the nature of reality and enlightenment through the story of prisoners who mistake shadows for truth. These allegorical narratives demonstrate how ancient writers used the freedom offered by fantasy to embed meaning in stories that transcended the literal. Finally, we must acknowledge the influence of oral traditions like those found in India, Arabia, and Scandinavia. India's Vedic myths, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, created expansive mythologies filled with gods, demons, and heroes, as well as magical elements and epic battles. Works like the Panchatantra and Baital Pachisi offered collections of fables with talking animals and moral lessons that continue to influence children's literature today. The Arabian Nights, with its tales of genies, enchanted lamps, and flying carpets, has had an enormous impact on Western fantasy, shaping everything from fairy tales to science fiction. Norse sagas brought us tales of gods and monsters from realms like Asgard and Midgard, themes of fate and heroism that have resonated with readers for centuries. So when we consider the rich tapestry of ancient myths and legends, we begin to understand how fantasy got its start. From cosmic conflicts to journeys to fantastical realms, these stories laid the groundwork for everything we love about fantasy today. Many of these ancient narratives also adopt what we now call this hero's journey structure. This common narrative pattern involves a call to adventure, trials and tribulations, a confrontation with a major challenge, and often some kind of transformation or return. This formula for storytelling, first identified by the scholar Joseph Campbell, is still widely used in fantasy and many other genres. It's a testament to how ancient storytellers understood the fundamental elements of a compelling narrative, anticipating techniques that would captivate audiences for millennia. Ancient epics often presented expansive, well-defined worlds, complete with histories and mythologies. The Iliad and Odyssey, for instance, immerse us in ancient Greece, complete with its gods, heroes, and landscapes. Similarly, the Mahabharata transports us to a vast Indian world where gods and mortals interact, where there are epic battles and profound moral dilemmas. This attention to detail in creating believable worlds, even ones filled with magic and the supernatural, points to a tradition that would flourish in later fantasy literature. Authors like J.R.R. Tolkien or George R.R. Martin have created worlds so intricate and immersive that readers spend hours exploring maps, genealogies, and histories, a direct echo of the epic world building found in ancient texts. As we reflect on these ancient tales, it's clear that they didn't just inspire modern fantasy, they established many of its key elements: gods, monsters, transformations, epic journeys, and richly imagined worlds became the building blocks of fantasy because they allowed storytellers to explore the infinite possibilities of their imagination.